some water infrastructure. So we are actively working right now with EPA and the Corps as they rewrite a new Waters of the U.S. regulation. They are making progress. They're hoping to have something drafted by this fall and be able to move forward early next year with a new regulation. So something that we continue to look out for. We do have a concern with EPA. They are giving us a little pushback and saying that they might not want to consult with local governments. We keep pushing back and saying, well, we are co-regulators at the local level and have to help you implement Waters of the U.S. or Clean Water, Clean Air Act rules at the local level. So we do hope to be at the table so we don't find ourselves in a similar situation and can help them come up with a practical rule that we can actually implement at the local level. So we'll just keep you posted as to what happens. EPA is also moving forward pretty aggressively on their ozone air quality standards. How many of you are familiar with the ozone? Basically, it was going to require, it was a rule coming out of the Obama administration to tighten the air quality standards. Our estimates were about that 500 to 700 counties across the country would be considered a non-attainment, meaning that they wouldn't meet those more stringent air quality standards. If you're interested and you'd like to see what your county potentially looks like, contact me and I'll be happy to send you that information later on. But basically, initially this year we saw the new EPA administrator say that they were going to delay the Obama administration's rules, and then it was strange, he quickly backtracked and said that nope, EPA is going to now work with the states to determine these non-attainment designations moving forward. They just came out with an announcement last week that they basically cleared about a little over 2,600 counties, meaning that those counties meet the standards, the more stringent air quality standards. So they have about 400 or 500 designations left to make to see if those 400 or 500 remaining counties are in compliance. We've been working and tracking everything from the Department of Labor overtime rule, which would have really impacted counties as employers. That, remember, got stuck in the courts. The Department of Labor now, under the new administration, is looking for public comment and feedback as they have stopped implementation of the Obama administration rule and are now looking to potentially rewrite their own. Again, we were concerned about that rule as for counties as employers. President Brooks, our NACO president, mentioned this morning in the general session FEMA's disaster deductible proposal. How many of you have heard of that? Basically, FEMA's come out with a proposal that says if you experience a disaster in your county or your state, before you receive any public assistance, you're going to have to potentially meet a certain deductible level or have done some sort of mitigation efforts prior to your disaster to, again, qualify for any public funds. They're on round 2 seeking comments, but again, something that we've been concerned about and working with them as they formulate their disaster deductible proposal. But again, a lot of the actions we've seen coming out of the federal agencies are a little bit slow as they continue to get organized. A lot of them are going through reorganizations. A lot, as I mentioned earlier, are waiting on people to be appointed into key positions so that they can actually make decisions and move forward on things. And they also continue to be, the federal agencies, kind of paralyzed by the ongoing budget uncertainty on a number of levels. So lots to be watching right there. And that's just a quick snapshot of some of our issues. We're tracking everything from opioids. You saw the president come out recently with the announcement doing a declaration on a public health emergency for our challenges as a nation with opioid abuse and overdose. Congress is looking at new cyber legislation that would impact county governments. The Department of Transportation and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is looking at how to regulate drones. How many of you get into drones? Some? Okay. They didn't even know that counties deal with drones or should have to deal with drones. Well, I don't know about your counties, but some are using drones for zoning, law enforcement, other public safety needs. Not to mention that if somebody's flying their drone, you know, somebody else feels like their privacy is invaded, who are they going to call? County 911 to help figure out what's going on. If somebody shoots down a drone, you know, the police and the county sheriffs are going to get called. So again, we've made had a lot of success so far. That we have one of the only local government reps on the FAA's Drone Advisory Committee, We're up against some big Chinese drone manufacturers and all sorts of folks in private industry looking to protect and influence U.S. policy over drones. But it's an exciting thing. We'll keep you posted on what happens there. They're looking at potential legislation dealing with how counties run elections and making reforms. And also one other thing I wanted to mention that we were really excited about, in all these serious issues, that counties are tracking, that we've seen a lot of our issues from a county perspective going from hundreds of thousands of dollars or billions of dollars to now we're facing these major health and tax reform issues in the trillions. And we continue to face challenges with not only this administration but the Congress as well in trying to pass down unfunded mandates similar to what you all are feeling from the state level on a number of these issues. But what we're really pleased at in this environment is that Speaker Ryan recently started a new task force on intergovernmental affairs where he had reps from NACO, the governors, the League of Cities, the mayors, and a number of others more actively working with Congress and all of the different chairs in the House of Representatives to look at this issue of unfunded mandates and how we can have a stronger federal, state, local partnership moving forward. So some positive steps in a lot of this news. But today, actually in honor of Supervisor Moody, I just wanted to end on a light note. For those of you who aren't familiar with Supervisor Moody, at one point you raised chickens. My family is from Florida, near the suburbs. I don't really know much about chickens. My parents just got some chickens. So Supervisor Moody has been very helpful when there's been issues with the chickens, and because my parents don't know what to do. So again, this next part is in honor of Supervisor Moody. And this, for some of you who haven't heard it, are the political answers to why did the chicken cross the road? Barack Obama, the chicken crossed the road because it was time for a change. The chicken wanted change. John McCain, my friends, that chicken crossed the road because he recognized the need to engage in cooperation and dialogue with all the chickens on the other side of the road. Hillary Clinton, when I was First Lady, I personally helped that little chicken to cross the road. This experience makes me uniquely qualified to ensure right from day one that every chicken in this country gets the chance it deserves to cross the road. But then, this really isn't about me. George Bush, we don't really care why the chicken crossed the road. We just want to know if the chicken is on our side of the road or not. The chicken is either against us or for us. There is no middle ground here. Dick Cheney, where's my gun? Al Gore, I invented the chicken. Dr. Seuss, did the chicken cross the road? Did he cross it with a toad? Yes, the chicken crossed the road, but why it crossed, I have not been told. Ernest Hemingway, to die in the rain alone. Aristotle, it is the nature of chickens to cross the road. And finally, Albert Einstein, did the chicken really cross the road, or did the road move beneath the chicken?
Oh.
Thank you all. Happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
I have a question. It seems to be that SALT, there's a tax on that tax. What is the underlying thought? Is it just looking for revenue to try to offset the taxes, reductions in the corporate? What is that thought?
Yeah, we've heard a number of things as to why SALT is being targeted. First was, we heard from actually House leadership that they needed revenue from somewhere. It was one of the top 10 deductions as far as federal revenue. And they thought that state and local governments wouldn't put up as big of a fight as some of the other interest groups involved in tax reform. We actually heard that from House leadership. Other things that we've heard are from some of our opponents is that they're hoping that this puts pressure on state and local governments to reduce our taxes. The taxes we make our citizens pay, and that it puts that pressure on. Which we remind them that we continue to get, particularly from the county perspective, so many different mandates passed down, not only from the states, the federal governments, and over half of the states, counties are limited in our ability to raise any additional revenue. I'm not quite sure how it is in Virginia. So, yep, that's what we've been hearing. And it's been interesting. We've had some challenges. You know, every new proposal that comes out, every new negotiation that we keep seeing over the last few days, we have to continuously run the numbers. You know, the House came back and said that, nope, if we double the standard deduction, it's going to make up for those, for that money that is claimed by those who claim the state and local tax deduction. And in some cases, we have found that the doubling the standard deduction makes up for it. But in a lot of places, it hasn't. So we continue to think that a lot of middle class folks will be seeing a tax increase under this current proposal.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you go into a little bit more detail about the timing of the vote in the House on tax reform?
Oh, sure. The question was, what's the timing and kind of process for tax reform? As I mentioned last week, the House Ways and Means Committee approved the bill. Over the weekend, they've been trying to figure out the rules process for when it goes to the floor. Will they allow for an open amendment process? Will they allow amendments for the Rules Committee before it gets to the floor? Right now, we're hearing that when the bill goes to the floor, there will be no opportunity for different members of Congress to make amendments to the bill, which is concerning for us. But again, they hope to take it up either Wednesday or Thursday of this week. But the House leadership is definitely getting nervous with the number of Republicans who are starting to step out and say that they will not vote in favor of the bill. Again, as I mentioned earlier, not just because of the SALT deduction issues, but also just because of the overall level that it'll add to the debt.
Hey, get rid of it.
What's that?
I said, they get rid of this Congress, no longer go around with these things. That's their problem now, the Congress and Senate. I mean, get rid of people, that's what it's all about, the legislators.
Oh.
The Congress and Senate, not getting nothing done.
Question, with them doubling the regular deduction, how's that going to affect people who are giving charitable deductions? I know there's been some talk about that because people give to charity because they can take it off on their taxes. If they take that really away, and I think that's been discussed, is that basically taking that off, that might, because those organizations all will be coming to account because they're still going to want to operate them.
That's a really great point, and a lot of the charitable groups that we work with, there's a whole coalition of them, have been actively trying to work with the House leadership to make that exact point. That if the state and local tax deduction goes away, all they have left is the charitable and mortgage deductions to try to get to that certain level. So the charitable groups are all very, very concerned about the proposal moving forward.
SALT is different in the House and the Senate. How are they going to reconcile that?
Sure. Question is if the House and Senate bills are different, particularly when it comes to SALT, how are they going to reconcile it? Right now, again, the House has made a small concession on SALT, even though they're eliminating the income tax and the sales tax. Again, they're going to cap the property tax at $10,000. The Senate version, they're completely eliminating the state and local tax deduction. So what's going to happen, as soon as the House passes something this week, the Senate is going to pass hopefully something in the next few weeks. They're going to have to come together in a conference and negotiate those final details. Yes, sir.
So one of the things you always hear from the left is that, you know, if you do tax reform, the federal government loses money instantly, so there's an increase in the amount of debt that we'll have. But they never incorporate the other side of the equation, is the multiplier effect of economic growth that will occur. So they never put that side of it out. The propaganda is, oh, it's going to create an increase in debt for the nation. They don't want to talk about the economic development that will occur, economic growth that will occur as a result of consumers spending more of their money in the economy. I mean,
And businesses, yep.
Ronald Reagan experienced it, John Kennedy experienced it, even Bill Clinton experienced it with the Roth IRA. First, the Roth IRA was supposed to be a debt, that's supposed to increase the debt, and everybody was concerned about that. But at the end of the day, the federal government started raking in cash as a result of the Roth IRA. And so they saw revenue growth despite the cost of the debt. So it was a net gain for the government. That's the problem you always hear, even as consumers or as ordinary citizens. Oh, it's going to increase the debt, but they don't want to talk about the economic development and economic stimulus that will occur. It's when people start spending their money in the economy.
Right. No, and you bring up a good point. I think there is a recognition. It's not as talked about as much. You're right. I think it's hard to estimate what those numbers could look like. I think that's one of the challenges. For us, we're not really getting into the debt, that it'll cause. We're just sticking with our primary message that we too, from the county perspective, like the idea of having a more simplified tax code, and just arguing that our state and local tax deductions were in the original tax code when it was, just a page or so. But yeah, you make a good point that some of those overall economic factors aren't always contributed or included in the argument. Yes, sir.
I don't have a tax reform question.
Okay.
I'll let all those play out until I ask this one. You mentioned the regulatory process for clean water, the Corps of Engineers and EPA promulgating rules going forward or amendments to rules that might ease the burden, the regulatory burden on water projects. What's your sense of the timing for that? And also, two-part question, how real, how significant will these changes be as they navigate their way down to the local level after the EPA and the Corps are finished with them? And what's the process? Does it, as we say, take a congressional act here, or are these executive rules that are being amended?
Sure. I guess there's two parts that the administration, I guess the White House as a whole, is looking to tackle regulations in ways, and then the specific agencies, particularly EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. The White House, more broadly, is looking at the whole regulatory environment. I think it was his first couple weeks in office, President Trump passed that executive order that said for every new federal regulation, he was asking the agencies to come up with 2 that they would get rid of. I don't know if you remember that, the 2-for-1 executive order. He's also ordered all the different federal agencies to look at ways to tackle some of the more outdated rules and regulations, and specifically something that we've been happy to hear, to look at regulations that are most burdensome and costly to state and local governments. So from the White House side, they're kind of looking at a holistic approach. I also mentioned that as they move forward with the potential infrastructure package, one of the main things that they're looking at is reducing some of the regulatory burden or red tape on infrastructure projects. But particularly as it gets to some of the water infrastructure and EPA and the Corps on waters of the U.S., I guess the timing around that is they can do it themselves. The president did issue an executive order earlier this year asking them to not move forward with the Obama administration's proposal to regroup, do more consultations with states and local governments. NACO, the governors, the League of Cities, the mayors have all been involved in those negotiations over the last few weeks. And again, they're hoping to come out with a draft regulation by this fall. We've heard the last few weeks that they're behind, but hopefully we'll see some sort of draft that won't be released to the public in the next few weeks, and then early next year they'll actually officially release a new Waters of the U.S. regulation for general public comment period. They keep telling us, many of you in the room helped us and know our concerns with the Obama administration's Waters of the U.S. rule, how it would expand federal jurisdiction over water and require a lot more permitting process, arduous permitting processes for our state and local governments. They've told us that compared to that, we should be thrilled over what their final project or their final rule will be. However, we're not going to be thrilled until we actually see what they're proposing. And again, as I mentioned, we were concerned initially that they might not want to consult with local governments as much as they've said that they would. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. But yeah, the administration, the EPA and Corps, they can move forward on this on their Waters of the U.S. stuff without congressional action. Although there has been congressional action, as you know, over the last few years to try to stop EPA and the Corps from moving forward or to defund some of their activities. Yes, sir.
Considering the reduction in revenues of the federal government, thereby creating more potential debt, and the trajectory of the debt as a multiplier of gross domestic product see this influencing the country's creditworthiness over the course of the next 4 years? And, you know, given the economic development that is anticipated to come with reduction of corporate tax rate and all of those things, there's an anticipated convergence. But it seems like the window is very short, especially considering things like transportation funding that's going to end in 2021. It's going to shove a whole bunch of burden down to states where there's just going to be a void of dollars and that infrastructure dollar goes away. All of these things seem to be kind of converging right outside of this president's administration. So how do you see all of that kind of coming together in terms of what's going to be set up for the next administration?
That's a really great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I think at the outset of this new administration, right, they wanted to get a couple key wins under their belt. Health didn't go the way that they had hoped. They still might tackle it. Tax reform's their next bet to get a real win under their belt. But I think that there is a real desire among both chambers and the majority party, the Republicans, to tackle and address our nation's debt and deficits somehow. It's just continues to be how do we get there, and how quickly can we get there when it comes to creating some of these pieces of legislation. We saw sequestration, you know, those automatic cuts that were supposed to occur that are supposed to continue to be occurring. They haven't done too much to really tackle our nation's enormous debt. So I understand what you're saying. Yes, there could be a small window for getting that done, but I am not quite sure in the challenging political environment how they're going to get there. It's been interesting to see over the last few days, and particularly the last few weeks, a number of long-serving Republican folks, leaders, not only chairmen, but all across the board have announced their retirement. You know, what is that going to do to the party? Will the next election bring in even more conservative far-right members to put pressure on Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell in the Senate to act to address our growing debt and deficit issues? I don't know, but it's a really great point, a really great question.
It just seems like that there's an end game here, and you know, if we get to the point where the federal government's creditworthiness is called into question and the potential for currency devaluation, what's that going to do to the economy? It's a short window in order to create this growth, in order to offset this addition to the deficit. It's very concerning that, you know what, if we don't meet those growth targets, there's likely a currency devaluation, or at least a reduction in the credibility of the U.S. dollar as the world's currency coming right around the corner, you know, when they downgrade us.
Yep. I mean, we're going to see all that debate boil right back up in December when they have to figure out if they're going to raise the debt ceiling again. I think the challenge is, though, even though Republicans have the majority in both the House and the Senate, they don't have enough of a majority to do anything without Democrat support. And therein lies the challenge in this specific 115th Congress. Yes, sir.
I have this one, and Laura Brooks was talking a little bit about the Fema deductible disaster plan, and you just mentioned it briefly. That kind of worries me a little bit. Can you expound on that a little bit, what you know about it?
Sure. So Supervisor Moody asked a little bit more in detail about the FEMA's disaster deductible proposal that I briefly mentioned earlier. And again, the federal government is acknowledging that more and more disasters are happening that are costing more, whether it's some of the hurricanes, the wildfires, and they're really getting concerned with overall federal spending on disasters. So in order to address that, they are trying to come up with a proposal that basically limits the amount of federal spending on disasters and trying to put more pressure on states and local governments to come up with revenue to help with those costs. Thus, their proposal on the FEMA disaster deductible, where they are proposing that if a disaster comes to your state and county, that the local government or the state has to meet a certain deductible before receiving any public assistance. They're trying to figure out all sorts of complicated formulas, that if you've done some sort of mitigation project in your county, does that help count towards your deductible? You know, if you started a project, you know, a levee or something 20 years ago, does that count towards your deductible? they're just, so again, they're coming up with all these crazy formulas of things that could count to help you reach the deductible amount, but they're on round 2. We've urged them to slow down. Again, it's a tough balance. We know we need to address our nation's spending. We know that the cost of disasters are rising, but how do we find that right federal, state, local balance when it comes to paying for these disasters? Yes, sir.
Is there really a position or some sort of formula that suggests what the impact of, if the mortgage deduction is eliminated, what the impact on housing prices would be, which then of course correlates to what we charge? You would think it's a downward pressure overall because you've now increased the prices of the homes pretty significantly. So
right, yeah, and the national, I think it was either the National Home Builders Association, who's been helping us with SALT, and the National Association of Realtors, who's also been helping us with SALT, recently came out and said a few weeks ago that if Congress chooses to eliminate the state and local tax deduction, that it will, to their estimates, cause home prices to drop by about 10%.
and what about mortgage deduction?
Oh, mortgage deduction? I'm sorry. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because those two things are downward pressures on
Right.
housing prices, which of course affect us, so.
Yeah. I can follow up with you. I don't know.
Shift and shaft, right?
Yeah.
We got time for one more question.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending today. I never thought I'd go to DC and we'd be talking to a lady about chickens, so that's an interesting talk on that. But I really thank you for coming out. NACO with her legislative team, Deborah, does a great job for Virginia Association of Counties and for the whole nation. They do a great job. Let's give her another round of applause. Don't forget to fill your